Welcome everybody to another episode in this video series for PSI physics resources. And for this video, we're going to be talking about a specific activity that I like to use for a PSI closer as a physics PSI leader, and that is to predict the next lecture topic. And that might sound a little bit confusing because it's like, well, how do I predict the next lecture topic? I'm not a psychic. I can't do that, right? And that's not what we're really asking students to do as PSI leaders. We're not asking them to predict the future by any means, because we know that's not possible, let alone, applicable to really anything that you learn in the class. But I'll kind of go in and explain what exactly that means as I go throughout this PowerPoint. But I just like to use this PSI closer, and I'll get into why. Oops, sorry. So basically, the purpose, I think, of predicting the next lecture topic as a closer to PSI session is to really get students thinking about what might get covered next. So basically, when you are learning, throughout a semester, right, it can be easy to get caught up with certain topics, right? Because certain topics may get covered for an extensive period of time during, and this kind of goes with the third bullet point more than anything, but it's really easy to get caught up with certain topics that are explained really heavily within certain lectures. But it's always important to kind of push the envelope, right? It's always important to kind of focus on what's next, because there's a lot of stuff that gets covered in basically all courses throughout college, and you want to make sure that you don't get caught up on really anything, right? And so it's always important to get thinking about what might get covered next. And that kind of goes into the second bullet point, where it talks about, this is to prepare students for them not to get surprised by any new information that might get discussed. You want to get them thinking about, okay, this is what I learned, right, in this particular lesson, or in my last class, this is what I learned about, right? How can this kind of be further expanded upon, or what do I think can be further talked about in the future? Again, it might sound kind of cryptic, kind of confusing, but it's really, we're not asking, like I said, not asking them to do too much here in this kind of predicting the next lecture topic. It's just to kind of get their minds kind of churning about always being ready for what's next, how what they're learning right now in class might be used in the future, to just kind of get things to transition nice and smoothly, right? And again, kind of how I mentioned the third bullet point here is to basically show students that you don't want to get caught up on certain things, because you're going to take quizzes and tests on certain topics that you learn, but you'll take a test in one class, and the very next class you'll be learning about something completely new. So you don't want to get stuck on kind of one certain thing, especially if you're struggling with it. You want to make sure that you're always ready for the next thing that gets talked about, and that's the purpose of coming to the PSI session, right? Is to work on those things that you may not be. And that's not always the purpose, right? To work on things that you're just not sure about. You always, it's always good to just sharpen your skills, whether you're kind of unsure, whether you're completely certain about what you're doing. But it's like I said, it's easy to get caught up on things if you're not certain about it, or not 100% clear or familiar or comfortable with a certain topic. But it's always important to just keep moving forward, right? And then, so why do I think that predicting the next lecture topic is a solid choice for a closer in particular is because, well, it doesn't take much time. And as I kind of mentioned within my main body activity video, the main bodies can take a lot of time. The openers don't really take much time. They usually fall within that 5 to 10 minute period, typically below 10 minutes. It's usually more towards the 5-minute period. So, but that main body, especially, I don't know if it's the same way for all disciplines, but I know for physics in particular, when you're doing a lot of these word problems and these conceptual problems, they take a good bit of time. And so it's always kind of a struggle to get in enough time at the end of the session to work on a closer, because a lot of times when you're working on the main body questions, students will be like, okay, that what I just did kind of makes sense, but I kind of want to expand upon it further. And so a lot of times it feels necessary to do another problem in a very similar way to help students further during the main body, which obviously takes more time. So you're helping the student learn more during the main body, but that comes at the cost of losing time for your closer. And a lot of times you get to the point where you're like, okay, we feel good for this main body, but we only have 2 to 3 minutes for a closer, and so there's really not much time. So it's a really big plus here, and obviously you can modify your PSI lesson plans and things like that to allow yourself for enough time for a closer, but just the beautiful thing about predicting the next lecture topic is it just doesn't take much time, right? It doesn't take much time to be like, okay, what do you think is going to be talked about next? How is what I'm learning right now going to impact the future? And again, that's not an easy thing to do, but just to get students thinking about what's going to be next, right? That's always a good thing to do, as I've mentioned 100 times now. But another thing is it's easy to prepare as a PSI leader. And I kind of mentioned this for a note review as an opener, right? It just doesn't, take much time, much effort, anything like that to prepare as a PSI leader, because an important thing to remember is that, PSI leaders are also students, right? The students that show up at the session, they're obviously students in these courses that the PSI leaders are doing PSI for, but the PSI leaders are also students in their own courses, typically with a full schedule and things like that. So you don't always have a huge amount of time to do certain things. So it's always a good plus to have a part of a PSI lesson plan that doesn't take much time to prepare. It's pretty easy. So that's always a good thing. And finally, it not only really gets the students thinking about what's going to be next in the future, but it gets the PSI leader to think about that way as well. And that kind of goes into what I just mentioned, right? PSI leaders are students too. We, fall into the same areas in terms of like, okay, it's not like PSI leaders are like superhumans, that we're, above anybody else by any means, where we fall into the same categories as them. And oftentimes, just as easily as they can get stuck up on certain topics, we can as well. And it's always important for all of us to be able to move on to the next topic and be able to transition smoothly to get everything covered that needs to get covered. And that's really all I have to mention about a note review, or sorry, predicting the next lecture topic is a closer. There's not much to it. Again, closers, as I mentioned in the purpose of a closer video that I made, it's hard a lot of times to get to this PSI closer because of how long the main body usually takes. But closers are always a great thing to have in your PSI session to just kind of end things nice, to put a little cherry on top of the session, right? And it's you just want to make sure that you do whatever you have planned, and make sure that you leave enough time to do that, and having little ones like this predicting the next lecture topic are good ones to have as a closer, because they don't take much time, not much time to prepare, not much time to do, but they're all still useful, and kind of analogous to the note review. It just doesn't take much time, but it's something that can be truly helpful. And that's always a really good thing to have a PSI session, to be time efficient like that, but also content efficient. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you guys, again, learned something. And yeah, I just, closers are a great way to end things out. And thanks. Have a great day.